Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's session of the White Allies Network, where our focus will be hidden racism, part one of a series. Understanding microaggressions is our focus for this evening. And my name's Adrian Locke. In case you don't know me, I'm the network coordinator. And just before we get into the rest of the day, you may have seen two quotes from Reid that we've used in some of the publicity, and just want to kind of use those as a way of starting this evening. Nova says this in this excellent book, The Good Ally: pay close attention because microaggressions are deeply, deeply problematic. So the way every day discrimination and everyday racism seep in, spread like a virus, and stick to the cells of the DNA of this country. She goes on to say, they aren't often committed by overt racists. They are predominantly perpetuated by well-intentioned, well-meaning liberals, people who are mostly unaware or in denial of the potential impact of their words or actions. And I guess many of us in this network might well fit in to that category. Well-intentioned. The other thing just to mention right up front about microaggressions, what I hear from Black friends and colleagues is that it doesn't feel very micro quite often. It feels quite macro. They are small things that actually Angela, I won't steal her thunder, but she's got another really good quote from Reid in terms of the cumulative effect of microaggression. So it's a bit of a misnomer in some people's minds, but we're going to work with it because that's the common language that is being used right now. Just to give you an indication of the agenda for this evening, just a note about the recording, and I should have mentioned this more often in our sessions, that the session will be recorded, but when and the purpose of that is so that other people can catch up with this. It'll be on the Deeper Leaders YouTube channel. Other people that aren't able to be here can catch up with the recording at a later stage. But everyone's faces will be blurred on the recording. I'll be doing the editing, and I will blur everyone's faces so that no faces will be seen on the recording itself. If at any stage you think, actually, I've said something I prefer not to be on the recording, then I'm very happy to edit that out as well. So just do let me know. I don't want you to be restricted in any way by the fact that we're recording it. Just to note that. If you say something that you might regret, then just let me know and I can edit that out. A reminder of our purpose in just a moment, and then my usual catch-up of race and racism in the news. And then Angela's going to lead us through the topic of understanding microaggressions using a couple of video resources that she'll come on to in a moment. I'm then going to remind us about the qualities of our spaces, some of the ground rules of us working together. Before we do something a bit different this time, because we are going to hold some listening spaces. First of all, Shelley is going to convene a listening space where we invite people of color who have joined us this evening to share some of their experiences of microaggressions, and the rest of us just listen and hear their stories and hear their thoughts and their views. We'll come on to this. We want everyone to feel as safe as they possibly can. So only share if you feel resilient enough to share, but there'll be a space there if you want to share. And once those of us who pass as white have heard those stories and those comments, then we will reverse the process and we will talk together about what we've heard and the impact that's had on us. And we've got some questions to guide those spaces. There'll be about 15 minutes in each of those spaces a bit later on. More on that a little later, but I just wanted to flag that up at the beginning, doing something a bit different this evening. Then, as usual, I'll share what's next on the agenda, the next two sessions that we've got planned for 2024. And then after 9:30, we will turn off the recording. And feel free to hang around for beyond 9:30 for 15 to 20 minutes or so for a catch-up and a conversation, if you can. And it's lovely that so many do stay with us over that period as well. So that's the agenda for this evening. Just to remind you of our purpose, White Allies Network aims to help us become true allies of people of color in the fight against racial injustice, to learn about ourselves as white people, our histories, privileges, and impact, to learn about people of color, their histories, experiences, and perspectives, to develop ideas of action for action. This is not just a talking shop. We want to make a difference. We want to take action, and we want to step up, take responsibility for taking action that we can take individually, collectively, and in partnership with others towards racial justice. And just to really emphasize, everyone is welcome in our meetings, both those that join us as aspiring white allies, but also those who choose to join us as co-mentors, people of color that can journey with us. We do recognize there's a degree of cost involved in that, and you're talking about your experiences. So we really appreciate everyone that can travel with us on this journey. So race and racism in the news. My goodness, what a period we've had since last time. First of all, this one came up to me. Number 10 condemns that a London theatre for hosting blackout nights. This came out in February. Rishi Sunak's spokesperson said it considers it concerning and divisive that the Noel Cowell Theatre in the West End plans to hold what it dubs 2 blackout performances restricted to those who identify as black during a 2-month run of Slave Play, a Broadway production about race and sexuality. That's just 2 nights out of 2 months. But in this febrile atmosphere, number 10 thought that was very divisive, unfortunately, even though this kind of thing has happened in theatres around the country a number of times. So that was one thing I picked up then. And then, of course, there was the Rishi Sunak's speech outside number 10 when he warned of a mob rule. And I quote from him, "On too many occasions recently, our streets have been hijacked by small groups who are hostile to our values and have no respect for our democratic traditions." I was trying to work out what these small groups were because all I saw were peaceful protests on the streets. But so these small groups hostile to our values and have no respect for our traditions. I wonder whether this might be this group here. I'm not sure, but you know, you'll make your own decisions about that. But anyway, moving rapidly on. Tom Sutherland, Amnesty International UK's Law and Human Rights Director, warned that fundamental rights were being eroded. He said, "Talk of mob rule wildly exaggerates the issue and risks delegitimizing the rights of peaceful protest." And I think the Archbishop of Canterbury also expressed his concern about the whole speech, really, and how it's actually seems to be more divisive than ever, perhaps. And then, of course, Diane Abbott, Britain's first black female MP, suspended from the Labour Party a little while ago for making a comment about the hierarchy of racism, something she immediately apologised about, but she remains suspended. But the news hit our screens when it came to light that the Conservative Party's largest donor, businessman Frank Hester, who's also profited from 135 million quid's worth of contracts from the government in less than 4 years, said in a private meeting that Miss Abbott made him want to hate all black women, I quote, and that she should be, I quote, shot. And he accepted it was rude about her, but the criticism had nothing to do with her gender nor the colour of her skin. Initially, ministers were agreeing that it had nothing to do with that, although eventually the Minister for Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, did suggest that they were racist, but they were casual and trivial, that she should be shot. Make your own judgment around that one. And then Keir Starmer started challenging Rishi Sunak to give back the donation from this donor, but he also came under criticism because he seemed to be more interested in that than necessarily supporting Diane Abbott. And apparently Diane reported that Keir came up to her and said, how can we support you? And she said, invite me back into the Labour Party. And he just ignored that and said, but how can we support you? Because that doesn't seem to be an option at the moment, although Angela Rayner, the deputy leader, is suggesting that maybe that is possible. But I'm not sure the Labour Party came out brilliantly in terms of their support for Diana, unfortunately. And then we hear that Diane Abbott stood up to try and talk on this race row 46 times within 35 minutes in a Prime Minister's question time, when the way that you can express your views is you stand up and you're invited by the Speaker of the House in the UK government to then speak. She stood up 46 times. Abbott was completely ignored by the Speaker of the House, and this was an issue about her. So he didn't come out very well either in this. And Diane Abbott has actually talked about feeling very vulnerable at the moment to attack of all kinds. So not a pretty sight in UK politics at the moment, I would suggest. Bit of good news though. CFE are hoping to create a £1 billion fund to address the legacy of slavery. They originally marked 100 million, but acknowledged that it wasn't enough, and are aiming to develop a £1 billion fund. So that's some good action from the church in recompense for some of the treatment and involvement in slavery in the past. And also, we have the first black leader in any European country, in Vaughan Gething, the First Minister of Wales. So that is really quite remarkable, isn't it? The fact that we have now three First Ministers of England, Scotland, and Wales, and none of them are white, is quite a landmark, I would suggest, in the UK history. So, plenty going on as ever. As you can see, Ray's raised his hand. Very quick comment, Ray, do you want to make?
Yeah, just there was an article in the news which I picked up, which focused on racism suffered by East Asians.
Yes.
And I think we have our own members who have come along and, and they are representing their East Asian origins and the racism that they have faced. So I'll dig out the article and I'll post it to you.
Thank you. Yes. And I wasn't going to mention it this time because it's something that Irene is actually going to focus on for our next session.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I didn't mean to just acknowledge the fact there have been a number of reports, and there was an article in the Metro as well about racist comments from BA crew to Chinese passengers. But I don't want to steal Irene's thunder because she's going to use that as an example next time. But you're absolutely right. And there was an excellent Radio 4 program, which did start to really add their voices to what Irene's been telling us for a little while, is that there is another area of hidden racism that isn't so obvious to those of us who are white, but is very obvious to those who are British-born Chinese and others of East and Southeast Asian origin. Yes, so I'm going to hand over before any further delay to Angela, who's going to take us into some of the content around understanding microaggressions. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow her to do that.
Thank you, Adrian. So this short presentation will illustrate what microaggressions are and the impact they have from different perspectives. How, as Adrian's just said, the impact is macro, it isn't micro at all. In The Good Ally, Nova Reid's book about ways of disrupting racism, she's written a chapter on microaggressions, and in it, she writes, "Consider microaggressions like snowflakes. At first fall, they seem quite harmless, but overnight, the ice starts to build up and that pristine surface suddenly becomes dangerous, volatile ground where we slip and fall each time we go outside. Perhaps at first spraining a wrist and then breaking a bone, and then over months and years, what once were seemingly harmless snowflakes collectively cause a devastating avalanche." Professor Derald Wing Su has studied racial microaggressions for more than 20 years. As you can see, he is Professor of Psychology and Education in the Department of Counseling and Clinical Psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University, New York City. He researches the causes and consequences of microaggressions and devises strategies to combat them. On the right of your screen, you can see his book, and he teaches about microaggressions, and he's made at least one video. In his video which follows, he defines what racial microaggressions are and talks about his own lived experience of them. He also suggests coping strategies for people of colour, which he calls micro-interventions or anti-bias strategies. The video that follows lasts for just over 15 minutes.
For copyright reasons, we can't include the video in this recording, but we do encourage you to go and view it for yourself on the YouTube channel, and the address is on the screen now.
So, as Professor Wing Su said, microaggressions make people of colour feel like perpetual foreigners in their own country. But he does have his micro-intervention strategies, and there's much about the 4 categories of micro-interventions that he suggests available on the net and also in his book. This next video shows what it's like to receive microaggressions. It turns microaggressions on their head and targets white people. This video is just under 3 minutes long.
As before, we can't include the video in this recording for copyright reasons, but you will see the address on the screen now, and we do encourage you to watch that. Angela continues after the recordings have been shown.
So now I'm going to hand over to Adrian for the listening spaces.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for pointing out that I can't be heard. I was just thanking you for introducing us to the subject in that way. So, as I said at the beginning, and welcome to those that have joined since the beginning, we're going to do something a bit different this evening. We want to create some listening spaces. The first listening space will be where those of us who identify as white will sit back and listen to people of colour in this group as they share some of their own experiences and views on this topic of microaggressions. And then we're going to reverse that. We're going to then, those of us who are white, will share our reflections on what people of colour have said, and also some of our own experiences. But just to really emphasise this, we don't want anyone to feel under any pressure to share. Only share if you feel resilient enough to do so. We don't want you to be vulnerable beyond what is okay for you to take and to manage this evening. When you are speaking, when we're listening to people of colour, if you would put your camera on, we'd really appreciate that. That would be really helpful. If you're in the listening group, please turn your cameras off and also your mics off as well. We don't want anyone to interject into either of those spaces from outside of those spaces. So it's really important just to clarify that. And when you are listening, please listen with an open mind. Notice also if you feel triggered by anything that's been said, and maybe you could share that a little bit later and what that might have been about, if you feel able to. So that's the general kind of setup for the listening spaces for this evening. But I just want to remind you about the qualities of our spaces and the ground rules that we have agreed as a network before. Just to remind you of these, because these particularly apply in these spaces. We want you to sign up to be respectful and not judgmental, being slow to make negative judgments about another, being aware of the intersectionality of experiences as well, being humble and curious, allowing people, each other, to own our ignorance, able to say sorry authentically when we unintentionally offend, being curious about views very different to our own, pausing before we responding, particularly if we feel triggered. We want to commit to be mindful and heartful, careful, thinking before we speak, considerate in our contributions and our language, emotional and empathetic, not rationalizing away each other's feelings, but also able to express our own feelings without feeling that we're being judged. Finally, open and authentic, personal, able to speak our own truth, sharing our own experiences and perspectives, courageous, open to challenge and to be challenged, the courage to confront ourselves as well as others. Confidential, so that what is shared is kept confidential to the context in which it is shared. Kind and other-centered, finally, sensitive to each other's needs, building relationships first. Some will need more time and space than others. But those of us who are white, we don't want to wallow in white guilt. We recognize that becoming an anti-racist is not about me, about defending my ego, but about serving a greater cause. So that's just a reminder of the qualities that we have committed to. And we hope that if you are remaining in this session this evening, that you would also be able to sign up to those. We haven't really had it before, but if we do feel that someone is breaking these rules in some major way, then either James or I might intervene and ask you, or either mute you if that's necessary. But I'm hoping that's not going to be necessary this evening. I do hope you can hear me. My voice is not its best this evening. But just to explain the listening space for people of colour then, which is what we're going to hold first. We invite you, if you can, and if you're able to and resilient enough, to be able to share some of your own experiences of microaggressions from white people. We need to know, as has been suggested by Daryl Bing Sue, that we need to be much more aware of how we have that kind of impact. Be interested to know whether you challenged it or challenged them at the time. And if you did, what response did you want from the white person, and what response did you get? That's useful if we could hear that from you as well. During this space, white people, please turn your cameras and your mics off, and let's just do some really good listening. Just to say that Shadi Hussain will facilitate this listening space, and it will take place for 15 minutes, and then I will facilitate the second listening space after that. I hope that's clear for everyone what we're intending to do. As I said, manage your own boundaries around this, but we just to be able to really understand each other from here. So over to Shelley to facilitate this listening space.
Thank you so much, Adrian. So colleagues, and in particular people of colour, this is just an opportunity to share. And as Adrian has said, stay safe in what you want to share. And I do back and encourage us to have our cameras on. There is something about us declaring ourselves in a manner that allows us to be heard and allows us to be acknowledged. So I'm noticing that I am the only person of color on the screen with the camera on at the moment, and I will leave it that way. And
You're not, apart from Neil.
Okay, Neil, I've seen you now. Oliver, I've seen you now. Irene, I've seen you now. Thank you very much indeed. So let me open the space up. We've got about sort of 15 minutes or so. What would you like to share, and what are you ready to share? Oliver, please.
I will give you two examples. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. The first example is that my experience in France was a little bit like the doctor shared. When people ask you where you come from, or I was born in France, but when you say you are French, people say, no, please tell me. You see what I mean? So, and when I came in England as well, you know, generally say, oh, Olivier, like Olivier Giroud. Where are you from? So I say, okay, Olivier Giroud is from France, so I'm from France, but people tend to always ask the next thing. So I tend to always give my heritage. Every time people ask me, you know, where are you from? I say, I'm Ivorian heritage, and I'm French citizen. And I think that when I respond like that, I have peace, because every time I say I am French, I have some challenges that could put me in a different type of mood. So yeah, and another type of aggression as well at work is when I started my career here, my English wasn't really Polish, so I had a situation where I do all my analysis, people see the work, it's all perfect, and someone take my work and say, no, you don't come to the meeting, I'm gonna explain it for you. I'm gonna explain your work to people. So they tend to leave you out of the meeting. And it has happened a lot in my career where people feel like they need to speak on my behalf and they need to represent my work. And yeah, that's the kind of microaggression that I felt in the workplace. And it's not as if I heard some English that was more broken than mine. I was trying to, but you know, I used to accept that, but the more I grew into confidence, I was able to challenge that. So I say, no, I can present my own work. I want to be at that meeting. If I'm in charge of the project, I need to be there. And yeah, so those things were not easy when I was younger.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
Oliver, just on that last example where you did challenge, what was the response back? And how many times did you have to ask or say or state?
Oh, there is some team that I have to leave because the manager didn't respond. He responded with a lot of arrogance. there is time where I had to be very shrewd. So the boss of my boss, I knew he knew that I was doing something because I was paid, but he never seen my work. So, but I knew one day that I knew every time that he comes always at 7 o'clock. So as I begin to come very early at work just to meet him. And I had an encounter in the office with him, and I say, "Sorry, sir, do you know what I'm doing?" And he said, "Yeah, I would like to know what you do because you're never in a meeting, and we pay you. You're a contractor, and we don't know what you do." So I had to do that. So it was a risk because I had to bypass my immediate manager and go to the top boss. And he said, "Okay, come to my office at 7 o'clock tomorrow, and show me what you do." And when I show him what I was doing, he said, "Okay, so you are the one doing all those things, and those things get presented by other people." And I said, "Yes." And at that time, I know that my manager used to come around 9 o'clock. So when I came at 7 o'clock, it was safe for me. And this guy was white South African. And he said, "No, that's not normal. I'm going to help you." And he put me in charge. He said, "Okay," he separated us. He told my manager, "Okay, you're going to be in charge of that. Olivier, you're going to be in charge of that. And I want to see his work." And that's how it really helped me. So he was an ally, a white ally. And my career took a turn because of the act of this one manager.
Mm.
And it was funny because it was a white South African, right? And to show you that you can't come with stereotype, I could have said, "It's a white South African." I could have said, "Oh, maybe it's even worse," or whatever. But he's the one who actually gave me an opportunity. And since that day, my career changed just because one man accepted to see what I'm doing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Someone else.
It's really hard to know where to begin, because, you know, I have just an endless list, and I'm trying to think, oh, what kind of thing did I get as a kid? What did I get? Kind of thing did I get as a teenager? And then what kind of things did I get as a, you know, as I've gone through my adulthood? I've actually pulled out an email which I had sent to Adrian when we were first chatting initially, and I'm not going to read them all, you'll be glad to hear, but I'll try and just pick out a few key things and identify at what age, because yeah, and also in light of like the next meeting, so I also don't want to say, you know, I won't expound too much. As a kid, so I'm born and raised here, kind of white middle class suburbia, London suburbs. So is it pre secondary? Okay. Do you only eat Chinese food at home? Why don't you go back to where you came from? Did you grow up eating monkey brains and dog? Do you all do like kung fu and like, can you do all that stuff like Jackie Chan? And then secondary school, well, you'll be okay because you must be good at maths and science. I'm not, and I also didn't know I was dyslexic. Yeah, do you only date Chinese guys? And you should know this because, you know, your parents have a takeaway, don't they? My dad was a civil servant. I went to an office every day. Oh, I can't tell you all at the same. Can't tell you apart. Why have you got an English name? No. Didn't your parents give you a Chinese name? What's your Chinese name? Oh, it sounds really weird. And then I think as an adult, I bet you cook really good Chinese food. And oh, you're giving your inscrutable face, Irene. Can you do all that, like, you know, crouching tiger stuff, and, you know, can you do stuff like that? And just this weekend, actually, Sunday evening at church, this black lady who was a friend of a white friend. So I knew the white lady, I didn't know the black lady. And I had my very own Lady Hussey experience because I got so where are you from then? And I thought, I know what she's doing, but I'm just gonna say, oh, I'm from here, I live in this town, you know. And she goes, no, but where are you from? So when I was younger, I would have felt myself just seizing up and getting really hot and agitated and then not being able to talk, and then saying, oh, well, you know, my dad's from here, my mom's from here, and you know, and just to try and justify my very kind of like existence and placement in that particular spot. And I said, oh, but on Sunday I just said, oh, I think you're asking about what heritage I am, aren't you? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm Chinese by heritage, but I'm born here. What about you? What's your heritage? And I've had to learn that as an adult, to kind of get back in someone's face. Or what I've had to learn is to dismiss my sense of shame, of justifying exactly what that chap said, the professor said, to justify my very existence in being alive, being in this country, being allowed. You know, it's almost like, and you're still allowed to be here today, and the next, are you still here? Oh, you know. I've also had that that lovely, you speak very good English, you know, and again, growing up, it's just a shame of like, oh yes, thank you, you know, because you've got your parents saying don't cause any trouble, and you know, don't rock the boat and everything, so you just have to say thank you. But then I'd be burning inside and just having this really visceral kind of physical reaction. So, and in my head, I want to say, thank you, I was born and went to school here, and see how they like it, you know, or say, and so do you. Have very good English. I haven't. I'm trying to be gracious. Yeah, there's too much to mention, and I won't take any more time right now.
And thank you for what you have shared. Yes. So we still have time. Please come in. Neil?
Yeah, I won't take too long, but mine's pretty historic, really, because grew up in the Midlands in 1970s with National Front breathing down my neck, really, and so that was sort of racially terroristic experience. So there were microaggressions was kind of the minimum, and lots of racial abuse, physical, etc., every day at school for 7 years. So the microaggressions I relate to most, that people have already said, are the where are you really from one, because as soon as I got to I think it was university and started circulating around, I got asked every single party I went to, really. So, and I looked much more South Asian than I lost all my hair about 17 years ago. Before then, I looked very South Asian. And so, yeah, the thing I related to as well from Daryl's video, the first one, was that whole thing about kind of feeling ashamed of who you were, and not feeling the eternal foreigner, perpetual foreigner. So I definitely felt that way, to the point that it took me about 50 odd years before I could even watch an England football match and think that it was an interesting thing if they won. That's what it did to me. So in terms of my identity, the perpetual microaggressions were just topping up what was going on. So the interesting thing is I moved down, and I was in Liverpool, and there was more of it there as well. because Liverpool can be a pretty racist place. But when I came down to this area, I now live in Bournemouth, and I lost all my hair, and now I walk around and people wouldn't know that I had a mixed heritage identity, really. So visually, I don't get anything. So that's why mine's historic, but the legacy still has, less effect now than it did for the first 40 years of my life.
Yeah. Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to share?
Yes,
Please, Angela, do come in.
yes. I was born here in Clapham, and I still get the question, what is your heritage? Where are you from? Go back to where you came from. I was educated here. I grew up here. My parents were first generation from the Caribbean, but my grandfather was Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese. So my surname was Chin. And so I get it all the way through. You speak very good English. Even in employment, I got called into an office one day with an engagement letter that had been reviewed by the partner. And he had the client there and said to me, "Can you speak English?" And I looked at him and said, "Have you finished?" And there was steam coming out my ears. Must have seen it. There was steam coming out my ears, and I said, "Have you finished? And may I be excused?" And I left that room, and I was very upset. And my colleagues all said I was imagining it. But I called a meeting. I felt empowered enough to call a meeting of the partners. And what they'd done was already arranged that I was going to move to another firm because I didn't fit in. And the challenge was my colleagues didn't actually acknowledge this until it happened to another colleague, where she was humiliated in front of the client, and she burst into tears and ran out of the room, whereas I just walked out, because I didn't want to be seen as the aggressive Black woman, which I've been labelled many times. The funny thing is, I find that in my job, in particular, in the world that I come from, you experience sexism, racism, and just humiliation. Can you do the job? Can you count? I'm an accountant. I'm qualified. Can you count? Can you actually read English? And when they read my work, or when they see my handwriting, they're absolutely amazed. Then certain jobs that I went for, you have to go from medical. I went for the medical, and I said, why do I have to have a chest x-ray? Your blood is different. That's what I got. And I'd studied chemistry. I got a degree in chemistry, and I just could not believe in the 21st century that we're still dealing with these aggressions. And the thing was, the killing of George Floyd brought it home to me that actually people see me as subhuman. And I had normalized it, thinking this was normal. It's not normal. When I used to give blood, I can't anymore, but I used to give blood. I'm an unusual blood group. I'm the universal donor. And so, they wanted my blood. They wanted my blood. I went I got married and we went to Africa for honeymoon. And when I came back, I wasn't allowed to give blood anymore because I had slept with someone in Africa and they thought I was bringing back AIDS. You know, being discriminated against health-wise as well. It's really, it's draining, it's tiring, and it just ruins your self-confidence. But the killing of George Floyd and seeing younger people who haven't experienced these microaggressions as much, but they experience it in a different way, it's still shocking to me in where we are. It's still shocking to me. And, you know, just like with church, there's awe and wonder, there's still rage and shock when you experience what you experience. And all the way through my life, I've felt that I've been put on the back burner because, number one, I'm female, number two, I'm Black. And then I get the other side because I'm a lighter skinned Black. So I get that as well. So, yeah.
Angela, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And to everybody, Adrian and I had a conversation earlier in the week about safe spaces and brave spaces, and I feel we are witnessing brave space.
Mm. It's very triggering. It is very triggering. Yeah.
Adrian, let me pass back to you, and can I thank everybody that has contributed so bravely?
Yes, I have to second that as well. Thank you for your bravery and your courage, and those things that we all need to hear as white people. And thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take us into the second part of this, where we invite those who identify as white within this space this evening to show your faces if you would, and unmute and just to share the guidance for this space, the second space. The questions which I thought we could explore together is what responses did it evoke in you when you heard people of colour sharing their experiences? And what examples can you share of unintentionally committing microaggressions yourself against people of colour? When you look back, you think, actually, this is what I did, this is what I said, and I kind of get it a bit more now. And what can we do to avoid and minimise the chances of committing a microaggression now? I'm just going to share some thoughts about that for us straight after this space from Nova Reid. But anything that we've got that's we've already identified. And what have you learned about how to respond if and when challenged? And people of colour, if you would turn your cameras and mics off at this stage in the same way as we did before. So those are the questions, and I will facilitate this session. We're probably a bit under 15 minutes because we want to give people of colour the chance to respond to what we have talked about at the end, so for them to have the last word, as it were. So we might just make this slightly less than 15 minutes for us. But let's now just open the floor. Who'd like to share your reflections? Just heard. Thanks, Angela.
And my response is deep sorrow, but of itself, that doesn't help anyone of colour. I need to act from my sorrow. And you ask us to think about how to respond when challenged for making a microaggression. And from what I've heard tonight, my deep sorrow will reinforce my desire to apologize unreservedly when I'm called out or called in, or if I realize what I've done and I haven't been called out or called in, to apologize without any qualification, and to really understand that whatever my intention, it's the impact of what I said that matters, and not to attempt to do anything to justify what I said because I will have said it. You ask about our unintentional microaggressions. My inherent bias was, I hope it's far less subconscious than it was, but some years ago when a friend of my sister's who was black came to stay with me in London, and I was giving her supper, and I asked her a question about slavery. I mean, what possessed me? How unconscious, how cruel. And I won't go on about it because I think it will be re-traumatizing for people of colour listening, but it was awful. How to avoid is how to become, in me, how to become conscious of what my unconscious biases are. And that's an ongoing process. But as I said, at the beginning, when I started to speak, I hope that my deep sorrow from listening to the brave people of colour who shared just now will inform that.
Thanks, Angela. Anyone else like to share?
Start. I don't know if I'll be able to finish. No, I can't. Sorry.
I can respond. I'm probably, maybe my sort of attitudes are so deep I can't recognize them. I don't ask people where are you from if they have a clearly British accent, that sort of thing. But on the question about raising the issue of slavery, I think it would depend on the context of the conversation, because if someone clearly does have different heritage and background, and somehow it was relevant to conversation, then I would bring it up. So there we are. I may well be offending people dreadfully all the time, but I'm not aware. I don't see people's faces change or what have you. On the where do you come from? I've had my own irritation with just one pair of people who always ask me when I'm going back to New Zealand. I was born here, but I've been living in London since 1973, and as I said, these people met me when I first arrived, and I think probably they're both dead by now, but every time I saw them, when are you going back to New Zealand? I learned a lot from what we heard. You know, I couldn't have given so many examples of microaggressions, and I can understand very well how extremely irritating, and in the case of Angela, really the work story, awful, painful experience. And and Olivier had really good stories too, and I did learn from them.
Thank you, Anderson.
I found the listening exercise quite good is perhaps the wrong word, but how often do we sit and listen? Normally in a conversation, you're butting in and you're saying, oh yeah, you know, so you kind of do less listening and more talking, but this was sort of like an enforced listening, and it was really valuable. And thank you to the people who spoke, because sitting and listening for that period of time was actually something quite different and something quite valuable.
Thanks, Belinda. Maybe I can share something. The things that struck me were that just how one simple thing that you might say or not say can just change the course of someone's career. You know, I've just felt that for Olivier, just that one right ally that just actually stood up and said that's not acceptable. And you know, Olivier said that was just turned his career around. But also, you know, for Angela, you know, how the opposite was true, in a sense. That one incident, you know, ended up in her being moved. Firms, you know, just one thing can just change the course of the history of someone's life, and the responsibility we have in terms of what we say. I was also conscious that when Irene shared her stories, that I could easily have been that kid with her at school, asking her those kind of questions, without realizing at all what impact that has, that othering that Daryl talked about, in terms of, you know, that constant just saying you're not one of us, you don't belong here kind of thing, and just those small things that seem innocuous, but as Angela said, that, you know, makes up that snowdrift and a blizzard and an avalanche even. But, yeah, so profoundly affected by that.
I just want to say thank you to those who spoke, for helping, for both the courage to speak and for helping me to see things through their eyes. Because normally we see things through our own eyes, and it's only when somebody opens up a window that it's possible easily to see that. So I'm very, very grateful. I've learned a lot this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Miss.
I actually found I thought they were very courageous, and but I actually found what they said triggering for me, because when I was at primary school, I'm dual heritage, and I was called a half caste and various other things.
Care about that, Bruni. One or two more minutes if anyone would like to share that hasn't had a chance to share already.
Hi, I'm Jackie, J Ferrety in the as it appears on the screen. Sorry, my camera is freezing, so you've just got a still of me, but I cannot do anything about that. So just to explain that, I'm sorry. And I'd also really like to thank those who shared their experiences, such painful experiences, and those who shared so generously. Thank you so much. I feel very privileged that you're prepared to do that. And I'm not new to working on race issues. However, I just feel shocked every time I hear people share their experiences. Like, in one sense, I feel nothing shocks me, and yet when you actually hear someone's personal experience, it's just so horrifying. Yeah, so thank you again. I feel as though there's lots of other things I want to say, and I'm kind of typing them down and I can't quite get them clear in my head. So I'm not sure that I want to say too much when I feel like my thoughts are a bit muddled on it. I just do feel that yeah, I'm still feel like I'm not quite sure how to talk about race issues, for example, in the workplace, or whether it's a microaggression to I work partly on issues of equality in the workplace, and I'm also very much a political activist outside of the workplace, and I have been all my adult life for decades. So for me, it's quite natural to sort of talk about uncomfortable issues of inequality, to talk about issues of class and issues of gender, but I'm still feel like I'm not quite sure when is it a microaggression if you're a white person, and if you're the person, is it okay to raise an issue if you see, for example, something happening at work that you feel is racist, or yeah, I just feel kind of quite confused about how to raise things, or how much I should be raising things as a white person. So I think I'll just stop there.
Okay. Yeah, we're all on that journey, Jackie, of understanding.
Yeah.
And then being able to decide in our own context what we can do and say.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
we do that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What I would like to do now is just if we end this space, I'm going to talk a little bit later about if you have felt triggered by anything, about support that there is available a little bit later. But you know, again, I just want to add my thanks to those that have shared. Really appreciated that. But let's all let's I'm going to hand over to Angela, who's going to just share a few thoughts from Nova Reid, and then we want to hear from those that have been listening to that white space there, what your responses might be, just to close the session this evening. So Angela, back to you.
Thank you. So I also would like to add my thanks to the courageous people of colour who spoke. And many of you may know that Nova Reid is a thought leader, TED speaker, writer and producer. But the reason she's here tonight, not in person, but in photograph and book cover, is because she has some ways, suggests some ways for white people to interrogate the reasons why we make racial microaggressions in the first place, and therefore how to stop them. Her background in mental well-being to encourage meaningful change from the inside out has informed her suggestions. So she suggests that we interrogate where our microaggressions come from, and that will help us stop making them. The suggestions that follow come from her book, The Good Ally, and from her course, Becoming Anti-Racist with Nova Reid. She says we cannot fix what we do not know. So white people need to be honest and courageous about interrogating our biases. Only by naming and confronting our biases and our isms can we address them. In her book, she also says that microaggressions are deeply ingrained forms of everyday prejudice that we white people have learned, but we can unlearn them when we understand where they come from. She asks us to ask ourselves who we automatically trust. What do they look like? Who are they? She asks us to ask ourselves who we automatically fear. What do they look like? Who are they? And subsequently to ask ourselves why, to be curious about why we trust certain people and fear others. She asks us to ask ourselves, what cultural generalizations do we make about different groups of people? She says in her book that white people think they don't have any biases or inherent isms, but she assures us that we do. She says they're right there inside us having a house party. She suggests we take the Harvard Implicit Association test, which you can find online, on race to show us our biases. And there are various other implicit association tests. She suggests we ask ourselves what microaggressions we've committed and how they link to the often subconscious racial stereotypes we hold. She asks us to recognize that it's not the intention behind what we say, but its impact that matters. And finally, she asks us to practice making genuine, graceful apologies without expecting congratulation or thanks, or, as she says often in her book, there are no cookies for doing this. She asks us to make these graceful apologies whenever a microaggression is called in or called out. She says that as a Black woman, when white people listen, acknowledge, and genuinely apologize, it changes the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. In these last few minutes, I'm almost muted even with the microphone on. Excuse me. Last few minutes, just like to invite people of colour who have listened in to our white deliberations. Just anything you'd like to add to the conversation, or just yeah, anything that you'd like to say would be most welcome. Anything you'd like to add to Nova Reid's advice for us?
I guess what I'd like to say, it's a bit delicate, but because I've been perceived as someone who isn't of colour a couple of times, Adrian, you know that. So this isn't an accusation, it's just an observation. That's what I'm trying to put across. And so I suppose the whole business about skin tone and colour and all the rest of it is, it's no one knows what the person on the inside of their skin has gone through in their lives. And I'm pointing my finger at myself to need to know that as well. This isn't any kind of, you know, holier than thou. It's just a humbling experience to realise, because my sister, who's always been more paler skinned than me, saw, you know, what I brought back from school every day for those 7 years, and she didn't really know how to react, because when she was at school she passed as someone who wasn't really, you know, no one made any comments. They may have asked about her surname and that's about it really, and so they didn't know anything about her father being from India and all the rest of it. So I kind of, that's just a reflection of how complicated the whole thing can get, I suppose. That's what I'm trying to reflect on.
Thank you, Neil.
I think I would just go next. To me, I just want to say thanks to all of the white people who even attend this call. It's very honoring to come and listen. And I know it is difficult to be an ally. At some point in history, being an ally, you could be killed. So I understand why allyship is not famous. But to go back to my example, where this South African stood for me, the manager resigned because he acknowledged me, because I was given a project she resigned because he didn't line up with her. So to show you how difficult it is for people to be allies. So he lost a very high-skilled woman, talented. She was my manager. She decided to leave because he was a little bit contradicting her approach. And even to promote me, even the next round of promotions, he had difficulty because people say, oh, maybe I heard people say, hey, you're getting along very well with this guy. Maybe, are you South African or something like that? You see what I mean? And it was placing this boss in a very difficult situation because he himself is a white South African, of course, from British parent. But to show you how I realize how challenging it is for someone to stand for a minority because he could lose a lot of stuff. And I just want to say that it takes bravery and it come at a cost. And I understand why there is very few white allies. But just thank you for coming and sharing and be willing to listen.
Thank you, Olivier. Shelley.
So I suppose in reaction to what I've heard, I would ask white colleagues to bring forth and create multiple bucketfuls of micro interventions that you could do to be an ally. So when you see a person of color being made invisible, comment on it. You don't have to say you've made Shelley invisible. You might come and say, I know Shelley did that work. So do you see, you don't have to do it in an attacking way, So there's a whole load of micro interventions, and to use your existing color privilege to open doors, not in some sympathy way, but in empathizing with the fact that people are not seen, etc. So I think, there's a whole load of micro interventions that can take place. And if there are reports being written and it's only the managers who's often white per name on there to say, well, could we change the protocol in our organization that allows not only the senior leader to be acknowledged, but everybody that's contributed to it, These aren't super, super challenging things. So, if you are worried about raising a race conversation, you can still get great outcomes without needing to raise that. And as I say that, there is also a challenge that we must not deny that racism takes place and therefore not cover it up under too much softness, okay, because then the work is not being done.
Yeah. Thank you, Shelley. Neil, I can see you've got your hand up. Would you mind if I just finish the last two slides, turn the recording off, and we continue the conversation? If you can stick around, that'd be helpful. I'm just conscious of the time. Just to say very briefly, next time and beyond, as I mentioned earlier, Irene's going to help lead a session next time on 26th of June about the East and Southeast Asian experience of racism that often gets overlooked by certainly by us white people. And then in October, Robert Taylor, another member of the network, we're going to hopefully have the black curriculum back again. We had to cancel their session because they were sick, but in the 6th of October, that's the other one later on in the year. And again, all meetings on Zoom. Don't forget the resources we have on the resource hub on the website. Do tap into those. There's lots there in terms of advice that we can tap into. But finally, if you have felt triggered at all by tonight's content, do reach out for support. There may be people in your own network that you're aware of that you would be able to get support from, but don't suffer alone. There might be other members that you can turn to. Certainly, if anyone feels they can turn to me for support, I would be very happy to support in any way that I can. But also, if you're looking for somewhere outside of this network, the Emotional Emancipation Circles from the Community Healing Network, I've heard some really good things about from people of colour who have been triggered by these issues and are seeking a place to talk that feels they can be courageous and safe. So don't suffer alone if you have been triggered. We do recognise there is a real cost to talking about these things, and I am enormously, we are as a network enormously grateful for those people of colour that are journeying with us through this. If you hadn't shared your experiences this evening, you know, we would be so much poorer in our understanding of the issues. So we really do appreciate the cost to you and your willingness to share. So I'm going to close the sessions, stop sharing and stop the recording now. But if you can stick around, then do, let's continue the conversation.